هذا القرآن يوحدنا لطريق الخير يوجهنا الله تعالى أنزله ورسول الله معلمنا هذا القرآن يوحدنا لطريق الخير يوجهنا الله تعالى.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the question, how come it's not fully implemented in any Islamic country? I think that's a answer that has multiple aspects to it. Number one, Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us in the Quran, Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the condition of a people until they change the condition of themselves. Obviously, in order to fully implement the Sharia on a state level, there has to be a khilafah, because khilafah represents perfect balance and perfect justice in that regard. So as I said, it's an oxymoron to say a king who implements Sharia, because that king would not be questioned in any way. And in Islam, at least on a state level, you have a khalifa and you have the shura and you have people holding the khalifa accountable in regards to his decisions. And so I think that the first thing is that, number one, obviously, because we don't have a khilafah, and that's the easy answer, of course, to the question why Sharia is not fully implemented. Number two, what you see happening in many of these states and in many of these countries is obviously, like any country, once the ummah becomes fragmented, like any country, every country pursues its own interests. Every state pursues its own interests. So for example, in many of the states that claim to implement Sharia, you will have institutionalized racism. Okay, so in some of these countries that implement certain aspects of hudud, if a native of that country was to hit you with his car while you're parked on the side of the road, you're going to be the one who's at fault. Or for example, if someone from the royal family is caught, again, this is why a monarch cannot properly implement Sharia. If someone from the royal family is caught doing a crime with evidence that is as clear as night and day, then that person will not be prosecuted. However, if someone who's poor on the street is even accused of committing that very same crime, then the punishment will be carried out on that person in the harshest way whatsoever. Okay, so from the aspect of hudud and these types of things, obviously now that the ummah is fragmented into states and countries and nations, every country acts in its own interest. The second thing that's important to understand is that when people, sometimes you have people that are demanding some form of Islam, and this is a good thing that we see in the Muslim world today. For the most part, the masses are demanding some form of Islam in their government, some form of Islam to rule them in these Muslim majority countries, and that's coming alongside calls of justice. And what you see happening over there is that the same people, for example, who would be calling for justice, calling for Islamic law and these types of things, are people who are dealing with interest, people who live lives in haram businesses and so on and so forth sometimes. Okay, so even the people, I think, have a different view of what Sharia is, so they don't even know what they're calling for in the first place. And the third thing I would recommend everyone to read, it's a very good book, it's called The Rise and Fall of the Islamic State. The Rise and Fall of the Islamic State is written by a Harvard professor who's an Orthodox Jew by the name of Norman Feldman. And what he shows basically is how the Islamic State slowly deteriorated once the scholars had decreased importance. Once Islamic scholars stopped, being consulted, the less importance that was placed upon Islamic scholarship, the more that you saw the Islamic State decreasing steadily. Okay, and if we apply this on a micro level, by the way, and we look at our masajid today, then we can see this is also happening. So people of knowledge occupy a very low position traditionally in Muslim societies. They are not the most respected or elite. Rather, usually in the Muslim world, you get sent to study Islamic studies whenever you weren't able to make it anywhere else, in any other field. And we all know that depending on what country you live in, the imams are the lowest paid in society. They don't have anything to do in that regard. So decreased importance of scholars. When you stop valuing the people of knowledge, you also stop valuing the knowledge itself in that regard. So it's a bigger problem, obviously, that we have to look at. But again, definitely, it's not going to be applied in totality unless we have a khalifa, at least when we're talking about a state level. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to witness, inshaAllah ta'ala, a righteous Khalifa. Allahumma ameen.
نفسي بنور من فؤادي حين